My name is Bo Hodiak. I'm a retired journalist now living in Florida, and this is the third of my four-part series, Who and What Created Trump. Now, we know that a phenomena like Trump doesn't just fall out of the sky. The ground has to be prepared for him, sometimes over decades, to make Trump possible, to make so many voters vote for him. And I try to explain, using these four people, how they help create a Trump. Now, Ayn Rand didn't get the attention she really should have in the 1950s and 1960s. The book critics thought her dialogue wasn't that great, that her characters were kind of wooden and seemed to be standing on soapboxes all the time. And so they didn't pay enough attention to her. But she, in my opinion, was extremely important in creating a certain atmosphere in the large sections of America. And consider, ever since The Fountainhead, her books have sold worldwide 30 million copies. That is astounding. Even today, many years after her death, her books sell about 500,000 copies a year. But where she is important is she influenced a lot of important and powerful people, as I will talk about this later. Now, the trouble with all this is that Rand, and I say it later on, that her advice on the ideal form of government is really claptrap. It would never work. And I'm going to illustrate this with Adam Smith. He is considered the father of capitalism. His Wealth of Nations is the Bible of capitalism. I say that Rand did not understand Smith. She either misread him or she didn't want to understand him. Because if we say that Smith in capitalism was arguing that greed is good, which is a mantra of Rand, that selfishness is a virtue, he would have become apoplectic. He was a moral philosopher. He was not an atheist. There are many passages in his writings where he talks about the great architect of the universe. Smith never would have said this. What he was saying was that self-interest is basic to human nature and that it is good. It is good to have self-interest. Self-interest has nothing to do with selfishness or greed is good. That is why Rand's philosophy might be good in fiction, but not in reality. Now, my second complaint about Rand is that she creates straw men. She creates straw villains. She says there are these creative people who make things and create things and so on, and then there are the moochers. And the moochers are people who want something for nothing, and of course you would probably put in liberals and socialists who are sitting right next to Satan, and this is false. It's not connected to the truth. If you want to look for villains that give the creative people a really hard time, much of the time, look to the capitalists. It's the capitalists who try to exploit and manipulate and suck out everything they can out of the creative people. Read a biography of Nikola Tesla and see what a hell the capitalists put him through. Thomas Edison, the legendary inventor, was also a venal and dishonest man. He managed for years to suppress Tesla's great discovery of alternating current electricity. When, during World War I, Tesla sent a proposal to the U.S. Navy to create radar based on his patents, because at this time, German U-boat submarines were sinking so many supply ships going to England. Edison managed to put that on the shelf. You'll have to do a little research to find out exactly how he did it. When Guglielmo Marconi, the father of radio, used 17 of Tesla's patents to create radio transmission. And it was many years later that Tesla finally won a suit against Marconi, and by then Tesla was dead. The two men who created the Superman comics, which became such a great franchise later, were talked into signing away their rights for a couple of peanuts. There are many, many examples of capitalists circling the dreamers, the creators who are not very business savvy, who are somewhat naive. And when these creators get into financial difficulties in trying to put their invention out, they can often take over for a song. And sometimes there's almost very little you can do. Take the case of Mario Puzo. Many years ago, Mario Puzo had a big bestseller in The Godfather, and Hollywood came calling and offered him some money and so on. And Puzo thought, well, I have a bestseller. I think the movie's going to be a big hit. Why don't I ask for a percentage of the profits? And that's the way the contract was written up. And the movie came out. It was a worldwide hit. And a year later, the accountant for the movie producers came to Puzo and told him, well, we've added up, Hollywood has this creative accounting system. And he said, we added up our expenses and our income and so on, and The Godfather made no profit. But out of the goodness of the heart of the producers, they were willing to pay Puzo a certain amount of money, even though they didn't have to. That's the way the creative people, the hell that they have to go through. So I will, in what follows, I will try to tell you a bit about Rand's life, which is quite interesting, and some of the situations surrounding her, because I do think that how a person lives what they preach does matter also, and you can see how it works. How did Rand help make Trump possible? Mostly because she had a huge influence on many thousands of young men and women who later became leaders in America. They became senators and congresspeople, state representatives, chief executive officers in big corporations, lawyers in powerful law firms, and huge contributors to Republican candidates. Rand gave them permission to help create a certain type of modern America. She made selfishness honorable and a virtue. She taught that altruism was immoral. So who was Ayn Rand? She was born Alina Rosenbaum in St. Petersburg, Russia. She was a young teenager when the Bolsheviks took over in Russia. They confiscated her father's very successful chemist shop and drugstore, and the family fell on hard times. There was anti-Semitism in the city during the post-war chaos, so the family fled to the Crimea, but soon was forced to return. There were days when there was no food at all in their house. At the age of 21, Rand's family managed to send her to relatives in Chicago, and soon after she moved to Hollywood, California. She loved Hollywood movies. They were her escape, and she dreamed of being a scriptwriter, but also a novelist. Rand had an iron will, a lot of self-confidence, and great ambition. The story goes that one day she was looking at her typewriter made by the Remington Rand Corporation, and so became Ayn Rand. She didn't want anything as common as Ayn Rand. Rand's first novel, which took place in the Soviet Union, was not successful, but in 1943 The Fountainhead was published and became a bestseller. I read it when I was in high school years later. I was mostly drawn to her hero, an idealistic architect fighting to make his vision real. In 1957, Atlas Shrugged was published, and the Rand cult grew. At this time, I attended a lecture in New York City by Nathaniel Branden, her heir apparent. He was born Nathan Blumenthal in Canada. I think he chose to change his name to Branden because embedded in Branden are the letters R-A-N-D, Rand. As we listened to Branden's talk, to our great surprise, Ayn Rand walked in. She moved slowly and looked very serious. She had a golden lapel pin on her in the shape of a $sign. She sat by Branden, never smiled, said nothing, and after a while she left. After Atlas Shrugged, Rand wrote no fiction and devoted herself completely to developing her philosophy of objectivism. She disdained all philosophers except for Aristotle and described herself as, quote, the most creative thinker alive, unquote. She was an atheist and valued, she said, only reason, rationality, and logic. Real knowledge was objective. If you couldn't weigh it, measure it, or objectively sense it, it wasn't real. But her real attraction to many people was her promotion of an indomitable will. If that required selfishness and greed, fine. One of her books was titled The Virtue of Selfishness. We were not our brother's keepers. Our only loyalty and duty was to ourselves. Rand was giving her readers permission to feel no responsibility for others. In fact, that was the noble thing to do. Rand wanted Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid abolished. The United States Post Office should be privatized, she wrote. I wonder if it crossed Rand's mind that privatizing the post office would mean closing thousands of little post offices located far from cities that never make a profit. The United States Post Office was established in 1775 because Congress felt all citizens should have a connection to the outside world and to be able to send and receive mail, get newspapers, medicines, packages. 60 years ago, the Sears Roebuck and Montgomery Ward catalogs, huge books, were today's Amazon. The catalogs contain many thousands of items people eagerly ordered from thousands of towns in America. That's how I got my Gene Autry guitar and my Red Ryder BB gun. Rand believed paying taxes should be voluntary and that the only business of government was to establish the military, courts, and police. She didn't mention prisons because I think she thought prisons should be privatized, run as a business, like in her view, the post office. While I was attracted to her iron will and support of self-development, I became uncomfortable with her egomania. Rand was saying Jesus was wrong. In fact, Judaism, Islam, and Buddhism were wrong. At this time, a book appeared that collected Rand's writings on her philosophy, her justification for her teaching. It was titled For the New Intellectual. Hey, I thought, wasn't I a budding intellectual? So I decided I would read the book as carefully, slowly, and critically as I could. Let's see if she proves her case. Halfway through the book, I became astonished. I realized Rand had no proof for her philosophy. You had to accept certain Rand presuppositions like axioms and logic. If you did not accept them, Rand's whole argument fell apart. You had to accept objectivism on faith, just like any religion. Wow. That shocked me and woke me up. Yet, Rand's book sold millions of copies and continue to sell today. Many people have said Rand's books have changed their life. Rand wrote the script for the movie The Fountainhead with Gary Cooper as its star. Just recently, Trump compared himself to the hero of this novel. Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, said Rand's writing inspired him to go into politics. Alan Greenspan, when young, was part of Rand's inner circle. He became chairman of the Federal Reserve. Some claim this position is the second most powerful in America, right behind the president. The Federal Reserve controls the money supply and the interest rate and is tasked with helping create a prosperous national economy. It has an enormous influence on the economic well-being of the country. Not surprisingly, Greenspan believed the government should leave Wall Street totally alone. He said nothing about the sales of derivatives that were making tons of money for Wall Streeters and the bankers. Derivatives were a major factor in the collapse of the economy in 2008 and 2009. When the Republicans gained total control of the government in 2017, Ryan drafted an alternative to Obamacare that would have canceled medical coverage of 21 million poor Americans. After a national outcry, Ryan's proposal was shelved. Having no alternative, the Republicans settled for trying to cripple Obamacare. Currently, Trump has a suit pending before the Supreme Court that, if successful, will kill Obamacare. Just yesterday, I saw on television Trump being asked what he had to replace Obamacare with. Something better, cheaper, wonderful, Trump said. But where is it? The interviewer asked. You've been saying that for 3 years. So you see, Rand's ideas were important and consequential, yet her philosophy was impractical claptrap. She was once invited to a dinner by the economist Joseph Schumpeter, a favorite of conservatives. He was a professor at Harvard University. During the dinner, Rand started talking about economics and her philosophy until Schumpeter couldn't stand it anymore. Shut up, Ayn. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. Notice that Rand never really worked in the real world. She worked in Hollywood, the land of happily ever after and of superheroes. She presented her thinking in fiction, where anything goes. We know from sociology and history that successful societies cooperate and have warriors willing to risk their life for their country, something alien to Trump. That he could call our fallen warriors suckers and losers is obscene and unforgivable. In my view, American society during the past 50 years has become more selfish, more intolerant, and Trump was its culmination. We now have a society created to benefit the 1% and the several million people that serve it and protect it. This includes lawyers, lobbyists, politicians, accountants, security people, and many others. The pandemic made many people realize that America was also a society, a community, and that government was essential in a crisis. The rich could not look while millions of people thrown out of their homes and rental apartments wandered hungry in the streets. The hated government that was supposed to be strangled in the bathtub was needed to save the asses of the rich. Look what happened in the French Revolution of the 18th century. If Marie Antoinette, instead of saying to her people, let them eat cake, said, open the pantries and give them all the food we have, her head would not have been cut off. The Russian nobility had enslaved its people in serfdom and essentially later and got its reward in the Russian Revolution. A similar thing happened to the Soviet Union, Reagan's evil empire. As for Rand, she certainly didn't practice what she preached. Even though Rand was 26 years older than Nathaniel Brandon, she inveigled him into becoming her sexual lover. Both were married. A few years later, Brandon told her he was breaking off their sexual relationship. Rand went bananas. According to her biographer, Rand screamed, "You dare reject me, your highest ideal?" She excommunicated him from the objectivist movement, ordered her followers to shun him, and in the next issue of her newsletter, condemned him. So much for her rationality. Rand advised her followers to smoke. Smoking was mankind's triumph over fire, she said. It was healthy, a sign of superior intellectuality. But when in her late 60s she got lung cancer with heavy medical bills, she had them sent to Medicare. Under her married name, she collected Social Security. Nor was her marriage to former bit actor Frank O'Connor so wonderful. Her biographer quotes him as saying to a friend, "I'd leave her if I could, but what would I do?" He essentially lived off her all his life, one of the moochers that Rand hated. But there is one thing that tells us all we need to know about Rand. Years after her death, her private journals were published. There was a page about a serial killer named William Hickman, whose capture in 1927 was a sensation in the newspapers. Among his deeds was kidnapping a 12-year-old girl, raping her, killing her, dismembering her, and sending parts of her body to the police to taunt them. Rand wrote about Hickman in her journal, and guess what? Can you believe it? Rand admired him. Here was a man not shackled by any of society's conventions, demands of any religious scruples. Here was a man who was totally free. He did exactly what he wanted. A Rand hero. Is there any correlation with the lack of empathy Trump has consistently shown for the poor, the victimized, the disabled? Remember how he made fun of the disabled reporter? Mary Trump, Trump's niece, writes in her book how Trump often used the N-word, nigger, in private conversations. So today we have the demonization of immigrants, families torn apart, children in cages, unarmed people shot in the back. Meanwhile, Trump visits the police, but not the families of the killed. A president with no empathy and zero shame. A Rand hero. The fourth is Lewis Powell Jr. and the Gaslighting of America. So thank you for watching.